Dear partners, dear friends from many European countries, welcome to the Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung. Welcome to our 12th European History Forum. On January 2024, the European Parliament, with a large majority, adopted a remarkable resolution on, quote, European historical consciousness. This resolution reads, for example, Europe's complex, conflict-ridden and contested past poses both a challenge and an opportunity for European integration. An honest assessment of the EU's politics of the past will strengthen a European sense of belonging. There continues to be a latent competition on partial incompatibility between different memory frames and the remembrance cultures in Europe. Current curricula and teaching methodologies should shift focus from national towards European and global history. The ideal of a culture of remembering and historical consciousness based on the shared European values and practices in approaching the past, yet at the same time avoiding any undue leveling or simplification of history. And collective memories should eventually contribute to and merge into a European public sphere. In short, a Europeanization of historical consciousness without oversimplification or homogenization. This is also what lies at the heart of the European History Forum, which we launched in 2011 together with Memorial. Within the framework of this forum, we have always experimented with such a European culture of remembering by bringing together the different historical perspectives and critical events of the 20th century. With partners and experts from Eastern and Southeastern Europe and Germany, but also from other European countries, we have looked, for example, at ways in which different European countries deal with monuments, public history policy, and textbooks. We have discussed new ways of teaching history, with a view to shifting focus from national towards European and global history and history teaching styles that favor reflection and discussion over knowledge transfer, guided by the motto, teach how to think, not what to think. All this is true while in the last years we have been observing a dangerous trend, the instrumentalization of history and historical myths for war and propaganda, as seen in the Russian war of aggression and annexation against Ukraine. And within that dangerous trend, it is our very recent European history, the history of the 1990s, which is oftentimes presented, taught, and publicly remembered in radically contrary ways, especially in Eastern and Southeastern Europe. Many of the authoritarian, anti-democratic, and nationalist forces used the 1990s as a projection screen to portray themselves and their own nation as victims, heroes, saviors of the people and the fatherland or motherland. They claim that their politics is a direct continuation of the battles fought in the 1990s. This applies to the collapse of the Soviet Union, for Putin, the greatest geopolitical catastrophe, to the secessionist conflicts in the South Caucasus, and also, of course, to the wars in the Western Balkans. We are still a long way away from a culture of remembering as envisaged by the European Parliament in its resolution. But this is exactly why the European History Forum is needed more than ever. So once again, a warm welcome to everyone here. We're very happy that you gathered, and I wish you a very successful conference, and I'm looking forward to all the very enlightening speeches which we will hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan Philipp Albrecht. Phillip Albrecht is the president of the Heinrich-Böll-Foundation. He didn't introduce himself, just to let you know. My name is Walter Kaufmann. I'm heading the department for Eastern and Southeastern Europe here at the Heinrich-Böll-Foundation. And as such, I'm part of the organizing team of this forum, together with my Berlin colleagues, Nina Happe. Nina, would you raise briefly? and Irina Golonyan-Gerz. Irina, where are you? Here. But we are also only the Berlin part of this organizing team, which also encompasses all my wonderful colleagues from our offices in Kiev, in Tbilisi, in Yerevan, in Belgrade, and in Sarajevo. All of you are here. Maybe you can briefly stand up, just, well. This is really a joint effort, and it's therefore that it has become possible to bring so many of our friends and partners from so many different countries here to Berlin. Thank you very much for being here. In this first round, in this introductory talk, we want to discuss the concept of contemporary history, its limits, its challenges, its chances, and the particular challenges it poses in Eastern and Southeastern Europe. Jan has already mentioned some of them. And we would also briefly like to touch on the history of historiography in the 90s. Yeah? How did it develop since the happy times of perestroika? Yeah? And I'm very glad that I have two eminent representatives of contemporary history here in this very first round. Professor Claudia Kraft. She is professor and the chair of the Institute for Contemporary History at the University of Vienna since 2018. Before coming to Vienna, she had worked at the University of Siegen as a professor for contemporary European history until 2018, and at the University of Erfurt as a professor of Central and Eastern European history. And Claudia Kraft specializes in 20th century comparative European and particularly Central and Eastern European history. Of course, she has published a lot of books and articles. I found particularly interesting in your publication list one book called, in English, it's a German, I think, but it's something like Between Gender and Nation, Interdependencies and Interaction in Multi-Ethnic Poland in 19th and 20th century. So you have also a strong focus on gender history, which I think is very important for our forum as well. Thank you for being here. And our, I may say, old friend Andrii Portnov. He's not for the first time here, guest of the European History Forum. Andrii Portnov is a professor for Entangled History of Ukraine at the University Viadrina in Frankfurt-Oder. The concept of entangled history, I think, is something very particularly interesting and probably for some of us needs some explanation. In Germany, you would probably translate it as Verflechtungsgeschichte. He is also the director of the Prisma Ukraina research network, founded by himself and others. Andrii studied in Dnipro and studied and worked in Dnipro, in Vienna, in Warsaw, in Lviv, in Berlin, and in many other European places. And of his many publications, I would just want to mention a fascinating book about his home city called Dnipro, Entangled History of an European City. I think also very actual, very important book. Well, and welcome to Andrii. Contemporary history as a task. This is a formulation that comes from Hans Rothfels. Hans Rothfels is considered one of the founders of modern contemporary history in post-war West Germany. He was a Jewish professor who returned after his emigration during Nazi Germany's time. He returned to Germany in 1951 after years in exile in England and the US, and then for many years taught at the University of Tübingen. And he was one of the founders of the very important quarterly journal for contemporary history. And in this very first number of this new founded journal, he wrote in 1953 a paragraph I just briefly want to quote. I think this article has become a very important programmatic article for the concept of contemporary history. Quote, "The political value of contemporary history. It will have to prove that a distance from the passions of the day can certainly be combined with closeness and the strongest concern, that it is such an intellectual discipline which, as an auxiliary force of knowledge, but also of self-education, reaches into the sphere of moral decisions as the epoch demands of us with new urgency." So this wrote an immigrant, a Jewish immigrant who came back to Germany in just a few years after the war to found discipline, a new discipline of contemporary history, yeah, with distance and closeness at the same time. Claudia Kraft, how visionary does that sound from your point of view today? Would you agree that closeness and the strongest concern can certainly be combined with a distance from the passions of the day without leading to relativistic skepticism, as you put it?
I think this is, in a nutshell, the problem of each and every historian, to position him or herself towards the subject of research. And this might be this very contemporary research, but it might be also something in the Middle Ages, which once and again is disputed between historians, between different generations, between different groups of professional groups, and so on. So there is something which is general true for historical thinking, to have this standpoint, this positionality, this interest in a certain topic, and at the same time the professional distance you have every day to create anew. And for Rothfels, this is a seminal text for every contemporary historian, because for Rothfels, he created from the scratch a new discipline, because in 1950s there was no contemporary history. This what Rothfels, the time Rothfels was interested in from 1917, from the Russian Revolution until the 1950s, was something which was assigned to political theory or to politicians. This was not something which could be dealt with in a historical way. So he really had to make an effort to say, I, as a person who is in a way infected by this history, who very much was influenced by the Nazi terror. He escaped and he made a great career in the United States. But of course, he was affected by this history. And he, as an individual, but also as a historian, he in a way formulated a kind of professional confession. And he was in a powerful position, because the Allied forces, they wanted an institute for contemporary history in Munich in order to get rid of these Nazi, or in order to work on these Nazi crimes. And other persons with a much more heavy fate than Rothfels, as for instance Josef Wolf, a Jewish survivor, he also was interested in doing contemporary history. Somebody who survived really in Germany in the Nazi camps. And he was told by colleagues of Rothfels, oh, please, Josef, stay out of history. You are too close. This is not your business. You are so much into this because you have this suffering. You have this history of suffering. You cannot deal with that. And Rothfels, on the other hand, he was really an authority already in the interwar period. He was a conservative German historian of Jewish origin. Then he came back with this great track record of American career, and he was in a way able to position himself as he did. So we see it's really it belongs always it refers always to the personal connections, but also to the let's say institutional possibilities you have. And I think this is, until today, it's important. And when we look at Austria, we have the first Contemporary History Institute in 1966 at the University in Vienna. It's my institute. And it was created in the same year when Simon Wiesenthal, the Jewish survivor who survived several concentration camps, who survived Mauthausen, he sent a letter to the Austrian chancellor, this time a Christian Democrat, and said, I'm as a post office for all these Jewish survivors here in Austria. Nobody cares for what is happening to these Jewish survivors. So please, Chancellor, do something. Create something like a judicial institution to cope with the Nazi crimes, but also to cope with this in a historical way of thinking. And I think this is extremely important to see the task of contemporary history is not only the task of professional historians, it's also the task and the involvement of people who are in a way affected by this recent history.
Well, Andrii, I'm nearly hesitating to ask you, because the scientific district in Ukraine, as we all know, is currently fighting for its survival. It's fighting for its survival as a state, a nation against an aggressor who denies its identity, its history, just wants to destroy it. But at the same time, Ukraine must also struggle here for its own right to be recognized as a state, as a country, and as a society with its own very specific history and culture. And even yourself, as we know, institutionally, your chair was established as the first chair for Ukrainian history in Germany, the first chair only after long battles. So in this battle for attention for Ukrainian history, what about the distance? And what maybe if we look at the 90s, how do the 90s relate to the concept of entangled history of Ukraine?
Well, yeah, thank you, dear Walter. So first of all, dear colleagues, maybe I should start really with thanking Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung for having such forums for so many years. I should admit, I've tried to recollect the very first forum. It was not easy because there were so many, so they're kind of, like mixed up. But indeed, it's a very important initiative. And look, dear colleagues, seriously, until now, there are not so many occasions, not just in Berlin, anywhere, to exchange our views or to talk directly, let's say, for the people who are doing research or who are living, let's say, in so-called Western Balkans and, let's say, Georgia, Ukraine, Belarus, and vice versa. So this, communication is pretty limited. And that's a big problem, because I think that we could learn a lot, indeed, starting from such banal idea as comparing the dissolution of the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia, and going then deeper into some structures, let's say, of social life, corruption, if you wish, cultural relations, religion situation, right, in our part of Europe. So in this sense, that's really fascinating. Thank you very much indeed. And also thank you, dear Jan, for reminding this resolution. I should admit I've kind of forgotten about it, but actually it fits, indeed, it fits well into the title of my book and the title of our conference, because, okay, what could I say? I could tell quite frankly that there is a tension, in my view, of course, maybe I'm wrong, there is a tension if you look, let's say, at Ukrainian studies, yeah, or Ukrainian history writing in Ukraine nowadays. So the tension between those common European values, whatever we mean under those definitions, that's a long discussion, of course, to go into detail, but we kind of assume more or less it's about democracy, tolerance, human rights, right? Stuff like that. And the tendency to, and now I'm thinking, how should I call it, going back or reviving, reassessing, I don't know, the so-called national history or national history writing. And I could tell you even more, if you wish, to provoke discussion. Maybe not now, but later on, today and tomorrow. Look, dear colleagues, quite often, this pretty, I would say, legitimate and important notion of post-colonial approach to, and now you have a long list, Russian history, Soviet history, German history, if you wish, right, and so on. But in case of Ukraine, of course, first and foremost, Russian history and Russian politics towards Ukraine. Yeah. So this post-colonial approach, not always, but quite often, is presented or exercised in a sense of like going back to national history writing. And here we have this kind of like tension or a problem, because actually resolutions and many other like documents, they're saying something else. And I would say that's real intellectual and political, let's be frank, intellectual and political challenge for historians who are doing their work. So that's first. Secondly, when I, for instance, that's actually a long and strange story how I went on with my book on Dnipro, because my regional plan was very simple. My plan was like that. It was 10 years ago. I thought, I'll come to Berlin for 1 year, finish this book, publish it in Ukraine, that's it. Like very simple, because I like became fascinated in a place I left some time ago. And then, as we all know, what happened. And then actually contemporary history, if one could say, contemporary history like came for me or to me, because the Maidan movements of the Revolution of Dignity in Ukraine started. And instead of finishing my book, I initiated Prisma Ukraina, mentioned by Walter. And that is why this writing took much more time. So instead of 1 year, 10 years. But I think it was not bad, because at the end, actually, I would probably say that one of the ideas of this book was to at least to try to show the possibilities of writing the history of some locality, in this sense in southern Ukraine, but to write in this history not as a local history, not as a national history, not even as an urban history, if I may say so, but as a kind of entangled history which strives to put this local material into all possible broader contexts. So the context of the 2 world wars, the Holocaust, of course, Soviet experiments, social, national, religious, whatever, but also such events as the dissolution of the Soviet Union and its further transformation. So to the last point, dear Walter, about the 90s, I would dare to say that probably those 90s, they're really, they're indeed important. And one could also say that, at least to some extent, the ongoing war against Ukraine, it is also kind of, maybe belated, effect, outcome, element of the dissolution of the Soviet Empire we had so many years ago. Let me remind you, dear colleagues, we know that, of course, that this dissolution in 1991 went peacefully. At least in Ukraine it was peaceful. It was not so peaceful as we all know, like in Georgia, we have some violent clashes. We have them in Lithuania. We have, of course, those ethnic tensions in Azerbaijan. And actually, look, those tensions, they are kind of solved now in these Armenian-Azerbaijan relations in the context of the ongoing Russian war against Ukraine. So kind of we are like going back to the issues. I remember as a schoolboy in our closed city of Dnipropetrovsk being shocked by the information about, like ethnic violence in the Caucasian republics. So I think that 1990s is a very relevant topic. It's literally about like us now. It's also about, dear colleagues, it's about, let's say, a political or cultural background of some politicians, like for instance, President Zelensky, who is a bit older than me, but that's exactly this generation. So people who were still like kind of partly raised in the Soviet Union and partly after its collapse. It's a very interesting combination. So you have like both, in you. And it's really, as Claudia said, it's not just history. I'm sorry, maybe as a historian, but it's not just history. It is also very much an urgent political or social issue. How could we live in a world that looks probably not so optimistic or not so bright as we all expected actually in the 90s, in the perestroika years. So let us seriously think about it.
Absolutely, we'll come back to Ukraine in the 90s in a second. Maybe we look at Poland for a second, with where the 90s have been such an exciting time, but also a time of very big struggles. When we think about the legacy of the Solidarność movement, the formation of different political camps, the economic reforms with all these winners and losers. if you approach Poland's history in the 90s, what are the, and it's extremely entrenched and very, very conflictive. What are the, and you are coming as an outsider, or not from Poland yourself, what are the kind of offers you can make as a historian in order to, what historiography can offer to a ongoing political struggle?
Yes, I think what is very interesting when Andrii talked about this coming back of history once and again, I was thinking about East Central Europe, about Poland, but also about Czechoslovakia, and I was thinking, no, it's a little bit different in East Central Europe, because you have this very, very strong political framing of catching up with the West. So there is this transition narrative which brings from the early 1990s onwards Poland and the other East Central European countries into a flow of democracy, liberal market, civil rights for the society and so on. And this is all something which is known in the West, and they just have to adapt. And this is a totally different framing and makes it for a historian also a difficult task, because you have always to argue against this framing. And I think it's, we have people here in the room, for instance, Florian Peters, who have written a wonderful book about this early capitalism already beginning in socialist Poland. And it's really hard to get through with such topics, with such ideas, hypotheses, because there's this very, very dominant framing of catching up with the West. And this is the first thing I would say. And I think this is something which, for me, as an outsider, looking from a German or Austrian perspective at Poland, is hard to accept. And it's even more difficult for Polish colleagues or Czech colleagues who have to position themselves always as citizens and as historians in this discourse. When we started, and I'm already so old, I started my studies already in the good old times of block confrontation in 1988, and then decided to become a historian of Eastern European history in the early 90s, and there was a huge enthusiasm. So the borders were open, you can very easily connect to Polish colleagues, the archives were quite accessible. And we had this idea, and I remember my back then teachers, they told me, okay, now we are going into the archives, and then we doing this thing, expulsions of the Germans, and we will get rid of this problem, because once this is researched properly, there will be no discussion between German and Polish society. And this was a kind of very naive optimism. In a way, forgetting about that, what Andrii told us at the moment, that history is coming back once and again, and it's remembered and reworked in every generation anew. And therefore, I think this is something which, of course, is especially true for East Central Europe, Southeastern Europe, because you have so many really rigid caesuras in the 20th century. But I think it's true for each and every history, because you cannot get rid of a historical topic. You have to re-engage with it, and you have to recontextualize it. And I think this is something we should not forget. What, of course, is interesting in the Polish case is that there was this very, very huge debate. What was 1989? What was the Round Table? Was it a victory of the free Polish society, or was it a rotten compromise between very tricky communist, post-communist elites and this naive intellectual at the Round Table? And from this starting point, the whole history of political culture, but also the transformation in a socio-economic way of thinking, is in a way influenced by this, I would say, master conflict about how to conceptualize Polish history of the 1990s. And only recently we have a lot of very interesting research about what was this system transformation all about. It was not about, as the Western advisors had just introduced democracy and market capitalism, everything will be fine, but it was about how people worked, how they were able to remain their, let's say, honor of a worker, which was something very, very important in socialism, and it was in a way abolished in these very wild years of transformation in Poland. this is one huge aspect of transformation history. Elizabeth Dunn has written a wonderful book, Privatizing Poland, about the production of baby food and how world capitalist framings of neoliberalism changed the whole life world of the people. It was not only about changing the economic system, it was a change of the whole life world. And you can imagine how difficult it is to get into these topics. Of course, it's hard to get to the archives of the enterprises, but it's also difficult to get to the memories of the people, because a lot of people do not want to talk about these very harmful years of the system transformation in the early 1990s. I think this is still a really important topic. Another important topic is the question: what is democracy? Does it mean that everybody now is legally equal? And what does it mean to have civic rights, but to lose, for instance, the right of the self-determination over your body? 1993, the so-called abortion compromise in the Polish transformation parliament. So I think these are very, very interesting aspects when you see how contradictory the development was, and that this transition narrative is in a way very, very harmful to historical thinking.
Well, thank you for mentioning this enthusiasm in the 80s. I looked it up. We are about of the same age. I started my studies of history in '87, and decided to study Eastern European history. With the same enthusiasm and the feeling that the world is open, for all kind of discoverage and advances and Wild East, and all these images, and but seemingly this enthusiasm is completely gone. Is it completely gone? My question, and you mentioned the very tough struggles in Poland, also today. It's very much about the 90s. How are you being accepted as a researcher from outside? Do you have to fight fights with Polish historians who prove that this was, I don't know, a great liberation, or it was a catastrophe? Or are your works also on gender and stuff, are they being read and discussed in Poland? Can you, the question is about our role as historians. Is it, what can we, I'm looking at colleagues in former Yugoslavia, where history is, of course, as contested as you can only imagine, and students coming from Croatia are taught completely different story than students coming, Bosniak students, and of course Serb students, completely contrary. So if history is contested and it's a subject of political fight every day, what can historians offer, or how can they achieve certain kind of, at least, attention?
It's a very good question, because I have a lot of, and now I can tell you thousands of anecdotes, being in Poland as a young researcher and talking about a topic, and it was absolutely clear that I only can talk about this topic because I'm reading Polish. And then after my talk, elderly Polish professors asked me, "Czy pani mówi po polsku?" Do you speak Polish? Which was obvious that I do, because otherwise I would not have read these sources. So it's a question of gender, of age, of course, if you are accepted as a researcher. And if, of course, it's also a question of nationality. But I would say this changes a lot, because now my colleagues, which now have 30 years, 35, 40 years, say they are so much immersed into an international scientific community, very much looking to the United States, to Great Britain, trying to get research stays in these countries, that I would say this question of national identity does not matter so much. Of course, it did at the beginning of the 1990s, when I was doing my research on the Polish resettlement of the Polish Western territories. This was a very, very debated topic, and it was debated because it was so much politicized also on the German side, because the whole Eastern European history, trajectory, tradition line is very much influenced by this German research on Eastern Europe. You cannot translate it into English. It's Deutsche Ostforschung, and it means there is somebody in the East who is not as smart and as civilized than the Western Europeans, especially the Germans, are. And we have to look very cautiously, because there has been a lot of German culture since the Middle Ages. You hear this very culturalist, very nationalist tone of research perspective on Eastern Europe, and therefore. I would say my Polish colleagues in the 1990s, they were totally right to look at me with quite a lot of suspicion, because my teachers, they were these representatives of, some of them, of the German Ostforschung. And this changed a lot, and I'm really grateful for all these wonderful cooperations I had in Poland, in Czechoslovakia, with colleagues who were very eager to cooperate with us, German historians from this quite problematic tradition. I started with Rothfels and with the Holocaust memory, and I would say a lot of this German Ostforschung is deeply rooted in this German wish to dominate Eastern Europe, not only in a way of political domination, but really of civilizational domination. And this is problematic, and we always should remember these problematic roots of this kind of knowledge production about Eastern Europe.
Thank you. Andrii, the Ukrainian history itself, of course, is very much contested in Ukraine itself. Does this also apply to the 90s? And if yes, why? And what, maybe?
Yes, but before talking about that, let me not forget this point about enthusiasm, because at least what I'm trying to do with my students at the Viadrina is actually very much to to give or to share enthusiasm, because we could be much less idealistic, let's say, about the developments in different countries with the socialist history, but I believe we should very much remain enthusiastic about doing history research and humanities and stuff like that. It's really fascinating. And also doing Ukrainian studies. Again, if you do it deeply, if you go in depth, if you, rightly said, read the proper stuff in Ukraine, and also Ukrainian poetry, which is completely unknown, unfortunately, and prose and philosophical text, it is just great. And the same goes, of course, to Bulgarian or Croatian or Belarusian. I also trying to promote Belarus as much as I could at the Viadrina, which is not easy. So I think that its enthusiasm should remain there. We should be just kind of critical about this, homogenizing theories that everything will be the same as it was in, let's say in West Germany after the Second World War. No, it will not be. And actually this model of memory politics from West Germany after the Second World War will not be just applied, in Georgia or in Ukraine. No, guys, no way. Let's be just realistic about it and think critically, okay, what could be done, how it could be done differently. Because German way in this sense is really, I would say, very specific, and it couldn't be just transplanted to other locations, which is often actually what foundations are trying to do, and I'm not very happy about it. But that's a different topic, maybe. Okay, going back to Ukrainian historical debates. Actually, yes, Ukrainian, from Germany, it looks maybe differently, but inside Ukrainian history writing, you have enormous debates, actually, on almost every issue, until nowadays. Really, even in the context of war. If you look at the books published, let's say, last year in Ukraine, you can find different narratives presented there. Of course, it does not mean that school textbooks are very dialogical. They are partly dialogical. Actually, what they're trying to do now, I think it's very interesting, actually. They're trying to change the way Polish history and the Crimean Tatar history were presented. Because as we all know, in late Soviet tradition, Poles, Crimean Tatars, they were very negatively depicted in school textbooks. And especially nowadays, of course, the image of Crimean Tatars, or Kirimri, yeah, it's the self-name of this group, should be different. And then if you think like broader, like think about it seriously, like we're talking about like Crimean Tatar group, which is like Muslim group. And it's a very interesting situation, like how you could find a positive depiction of a historical community, Muslim historical community, in East European history writing. That's not an everyday experience. So think about it seriously. Because again, if you're here in Germany, it's not a secret. Ukraine is first and foremost associated with nationalism and collaboration and so on. Okay, that's also part of the story. We should not erase it. But there are also other parts. Like, for instance, this integration of Muslim communities into the society, which we don't see even in Germany, if I may say so. Think about it. And that's a really different perspective. So, coming back to that, I think that's one of the tasks of the historians is to at least show the possibility of those different perspectives. And to pose the questions that are, maybe unexpected ones. Because actually, I liked very much what Claudia said. Actually, accidentally, dear colleagues, believe me or not, the day after tomorrow, Balcerowicz and some other fathers of Polish transformation, they will come to Viadrina and give talks at a big conference about Polish transformation from the economic point of view. Because again, you would have various points of view, like purely economic, or gender, or educational, or name it, like international politics and so on. And it is actually, I would say it's one of our intellectual tasks, and that's really, I'm very enthusiastic about it, to find all possible, unexpected and different angles, looking at, in this case, transformation, in other case, we could name those issues. And then we could probably understand something more about Poland. Maybe I'll tell you the last thing about Poland, what interests me a lot, and I'm waiting for serious research about it. Look, dear colleagues, more or less since 2014, and especially since 2022, we have, of course, enormous amounts of Ukrainian citizens, Ukrainians, living in Poland, partly as working migrants, partly as people who, decided to move out from the war regions. But the effect of it is that since 1945, please correct me if I'm wrong, since 1945, now we are for the first time, in Polish history, we have a situation when there are millions of non-Polish and non-Roman Catholic people who live en masse in Poland, as it was more or less before the war, in case of Jewish group and also Ukrainian group and Belarusian group. And then after the war, Polish society became mono-ethnic and mono-religious. And it's not mono-ethnic, mono-religious anymore. And now I'm asking, what will it bring in terms of all possible debates about transition as well, or human rights, or gender aspects? So my hope, if I may shade, is that of course this more pluralism on social level will hopefully bring also more pluralism into those debates. But we don't know that. We'll see. It's a question to be researched, how this Ukrainian migration influences the internal Polish political and social life. And I think we should look for such questions. Don't be afraid to ask them. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. And then we'll still have some enthusiasm for our research.
You will have it forever, I'm sure. But I remember, Böll-Foundation organized about 20 years ago a series of conferences on the Polish-Ukrainian relationship in Lviv and in Przemysl. We called it talks about borders. It was before Poland joined the European Union, and there were many fears that the new border will become kind of a new wall, the new line of division. Even, particularly having in mind the very complex history of the region and Lviv. And looking at it from today, how has Polish-Ukrainian relationship, particularly with regard on history, developed since?
So very briefly, I should tell you that I would say it is a bit naive, of course, to believe that all those historical, not just controversies, but traumas and bad feelings in Polish-Ukrainian relations, that they are all, you know, somehow gone. Not at all. They are coming back. They're coming back, and then they become like less relevant, and then more relevant, and then less relevant. So really, and as a historian, I would even say that there are some situations, also political situations, when it is reasonable not to speak too much about history, because speaking about history could also become a disaster, especially if you speak, you know, in this like primitive nationalistic way, which is always, of course, the case. So I think that those discussions about, especially, of course, about Volhynian massacre, right? They should continue. They should be maybe institutionalized again, because you know what I could tell you. When I was a student in Poland, so I was a student in Warsaw 2 years right before the Poland's accession to the EU. So it was like a very optimistic time. I remember this atmosphere, like we're all Europeans. Exactly, like we're going back to Europe, like we are now part of Europe again, all of it. And then I remember also my professors, some of them at least, they said, Andrii, like, believe me, like, in a couple of years, this entire, like, problematic stuff with Ukrainians, this crass narrative, it will all be gone. We'll be in Europe, we'll be, like, free, you know, equal, exactly, and it will be no problem at all. I said, no, okay, maybe we'll see, who knows? And then quite soon it came back with all, you know, yeah, with all, like, new complexities. So, first of all, I think it is really kind of unrealistic to expect some deep historical traumas to be solved once and for all. That's first. Topics like Volyn 43, it's an ongoing topic. You couldn't say, okay, we've solved it, we've signed some agreement, it's now like, you know, it's now in the past. Actually, it's not like that. Secondly, it's about political responsibility, the quality of the elites. That's, of course, the problem. Both Polish and Ukrainian elites, how they play this card in their, you know, present-day relations or whatever. And third level, society. And here, again, let me go back to my previous comment, because, look, dear colleagues, seriously, imagine, now we have hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian kids going to Polish schools and having history education, which is very different from Ukrainian history education. Maybe some of them will go back, maybe some will stay, we don't know that yet. But the very fact that such a person gets a completely different narrative, as I said, let's see, it could just like be a problem, mental problem, but it could be also, I hope so, kind of, you know, an idea to think deeper, to compare the narratives. We say, moment, but we've heard something else in Ukraine, and now it's something else, but maybe like both sides could be brought together in some, you know, complementary way. So that's a very interesting process in the level of society, masses of people who are doing that now. And for me, it's very interesting to observe it. As you probably know, I've recently published a small book about Polish-Ukrainian historical relations. But again, you could never say, okay, now it's done, point. Now it's done, and then it continues somehow. And we'll see how it will continue. But maybe the one thing I could tell you, dear colleague, that in Poland, we really have now an impressive development of Ukrainian studies. We have even universities where my Polish colleagues are giving lectures in Ukrainian, because there are so many students who came from Ukraine and they have like classes in Ukrainian. So in this sense, it's really impressive. And again, let's hope that out of this cooperation, we also have better understanding and better this mutual, you know, like joint projects in the future.
Yeah, thank you, Andrii. Claudia, Kraft. We, of course, talking about narratives, interpretations all the time, yeah? But to come back to, I don't know, Ranke, maybe, wie es eigentlich gewesen? Yeah? What to do with the history where we are part of ourselves? Yeah? We lived through these times, yeah? And many of these, fortunately, most of the actors of the 90s are still alive, yeah? Have their personal memories, have their personal sufferings, how to methodologically, yeah, how to research the 90s. Yeah, what are the what kind of advice do you give to your students when they want to work on the 90s? How to approach it and where are the challenges?
I always used to say that make it more complicated. Don't try to make it easy, don't just try to make it complicated. I was a little bit uneasy about the, when you were citing this resolution of the European Union that we are creating a European culture of remembrance. What should this be? I think this is, sorry, it's something very stupid, because history, and especially remembering, is something which is very much fluid, it's very much changing, it depends on social, economic, power relations, it depends on the collectives who are addressing with this history of culture of remembrance. And therefore I think this is something which we as historians have this wonderful privilege to make it complicated. And I think especially okay, we are talking about Europe, and we are experts for Eastern European and Central European history. And I think what is special about Central and Eastern European history is it's more complicated than Western European history. And I think these guys and girls in Brussels, they do not realize that there's not one homogeneous nation state, and this is not a problem. It might be a problem, and in Southeastern Europe it became a huge problem, but not because it's not possible that people of different origins or religions, confessions, cultural backgrounds, etc., are living together. And I think this is something people should learn again also in Western Europe, or not only the Eastern Europeans who have to learn democracy and how to behave as a good capitalist, but the Eastern European societies have to realize, and they do realize it through the huge migration since a couple of centuries, but especially since the second half of the 20th century, that this homogeneity is something which is never has been true. And I think these master narratives of general civil rights in a good functioning democracy, it's a wonderful, let's say, goal to show these poor Eastern European societies, but it's never realized also in Western Europe. And I found it really good that you are mentioning the situation in Poland with this huge numbers of Ukrainian migrants, which in a way shows that also the Polish society is changing a lot and is able to change. And when I'm listening sometimes to my family, my friends in Germany, how they talk about these Ukrainians, I'm a little bit afraid about the how to say, the political culture of this Western European country. And I think this is something which, in a way, always very much is the background of these debates we are having in Eastern and Central Europe. We always have the feeling that we have to explain and to make plausible this heterogeneity, which is not only is national heterogeneity, and it's nothing which is strange or have to be coped with, but it's normal, and things are complicated. And when you are going back into history, it's becoming more complicated. And now comes Ranke into the play. Ranke was very, very, let's say, cautious. He said, okay, I have these archives of the church and of the state institution. Wonderful. Everybody's dead. I'm going to the archive, and then I can talk about the history. And I would never dare, said Ranke, to take my own today's perceptions of political behaviors to measure this with these guys in the 15th century. And I think, of course, we can laugh about Ranke, but he was, in a way, showing us that it's all too easy to have this very stable position in our contemporary time and just to judge each and everybody, be it the poor Eastern Europeans or be it the poor, stupid guys in the 19th century. And I think so. Ranke still is valid to read.
Absolutely. I found it when I was preparing a bit this discussion about the tension between the kind of moral behavior of memory. So person have memories and tend to discuss and judge, and the kind of rational claim of research, that we say, oh, it's complicated. It's not just bad or good, or this guy, it was not just progressive or reactionary or whatever. It's complicated. But how to, and you have, of course, these fierce competition from mass media. That's always focusing on the spectaculars, on the very few events, and very much judging. So what are the methods you can apply? Oral history, of course, you have interviews. Archives, what about media, internet? How do students work today? If you have to discuss the, I don't know, take some kind of controversial development or event, be it the color, the first Maidan, or be it whatever, and you have so many post-truth sources, that just tell you, oh, this didn't happen, or it happened completely the other way. And it's how can, and I'm saying students, because for some it's much more dangerous and much more threatening, to go against the kind of general narrative. What can help?
I'm sure that Claudia knows the answer to this question. So I could just tell you that, accidentally, I started as a student in Dnipro, so many years ago. I started researching history or writing my bachelor even thesis about Old Rus. Old Rus, this really medieval stuff. And at some point, I remember talking to my professor, who unfortunately passed away many years ago from Lviv, Yaroslav Isevich. He said, Andrii, actually, Old Rus is a kind of I'm not sure whether he said easy but the point was that, look, the amount of sources is really limited, especially written sources. Of course, we have archaeology, but written stuff is very limited. Sometimes it's literally 10 mentions in one German chronicle, in one Byzantine chronicle, in one Arab sources, and that's it. And then you have hundreds of scholars who spent years interpreting those 10 or 5 mentions of, for instance, geographical names. And when we think about our contemporary stuff, for instance, let's imagine the amount of evidence collected from, let's say, Maidan 2014. It's enormous. It's probably, I would say, it's impossible for one human being to read or to listen, to watch all of it. So on the one hand, we are lucky that's this amount of information. On the other hand, we are in trouble because exactly, and sometimes it's also, of course, false. There are mistakes, there are misinterpretations, there are all possible, manipulations. And I should admit, for me, it's a problem. Because, again, going back to Old Rus, I could read all those 10 quotes. I could look for contexts, to read some books about, let's say, medieval Arabian sources. And then I have more or less idea, okay, it could be this and that. In this sense, as we know, some colleagues are applying all those types of, computer-based methods. Now, of course, artificial intelligence. Let's not pretend it's very much our topic now, how we use it. And what could it bring us also dangers of using it? Oh my God, very much. So I have no, no easy answer how to do it. And that is why, dear colleagues, maybe I should admit it here because of the topic of our conference. When I strived to finish my Dnipro book, I decided actually to make this contemporary part the smallest one, even though in terms of evidence, it's the biggest one. And as you rightly said, also my own evidence, my personal experiences and whatsoever. But I decided to make it very short, and to say that actually I am looking forward to new researchers who would do it probably better, find ways to, to cope with this information. And that's indeed a big challenge. And another big challenge, no less important, is of course, again, archives. Because if you think about, especially, of course, like Russian archives, yeah, or late Soviet archives, they are not accessible. And of course, we desperately need them if we need to understand what were the plans, like, in late 1990s. So usually we rely on memoirs, like people who worked with Gorbachev or Yeltsin or whatever. But again, memoirs are nice, but it's not enough. It's not enough. So in this sense, contemporary history, it's a challenging task. It's not an easy way at all, even though we are lucky, because if it's contemporary, it's kind of, we have this notion of context automatically, because we also live in this time, unlike medieval Rus, which is completely different world. And I think we should somehow find this balance between both, but I'm really sorry I have no good methodological answer to my students how to do it, quickly, effectively, and reliably.
But we are both sure that you have it.
Exactly.
Not at all, because I think history writing changed so much over the last 10, 15 years with all these new digital methods and with the availability of huge number of written and not only written sources, but only sound sources and so on. And on the other hand, it's history. And also when it's contemporary history, history is a foreign country. It's something which is not our normal habitat. It's something different, and we have to make this different very visible, I would say. And I tell it to my students, don't feel secure that you understand anybody in these sources. This is a totally different context, and you know nothing about this. And there are very, very different forms to approach this alterity. For instance, sometimes I do not know how to cope with some sources, and then I start to read literature, novels, which are dealing with this topic, and I'm absolutely aware of that. This is not the truth, and this is not a kind of historical narrative, but I get a feeling for the problems which are dealt with in these novels or in these short stories, and I think this is something which is really important to get into this foreign country, not only via these sources of political institutions or economic enterprises or something like that. This is one thing. The second thing is that I've got the impression that the students are really scared. They are scared about this multitude of material, and they are really happy when I say to them, just go first, you go only to this one newspaper and you make a wonderful media analysis, and then we make the next step. So it's in a way trial and error, and I would say we both are too old to have the right answer to this question, because we are not raised with these new technologies, and we are raised with sitting in the Archivum Acknowich 8 hours a day and just turning pages. And this was something which I loved and which is so far away now, because when it comes to digitalization of archival materials, Poland is, you can forget about Germany. Poland is wonderful. You can really do a lot of research from remotely. So just to bring again this backwardness of Eastern Europe into the play. Yes, but I think when I look at my students, they have interest in history because they know this is something different. It's not this very noisy stuff they get on Facebook and Instagram and so on and so forth. So and therefore we should encourage them to feel this alterity of history.
Well, thank you very much for mentioning novels and literature as a source. This is why we invited Nino Haralashvili this evening to present her novel Lack of Light that tackles the 90s in Georgia. This is exactly the reason how to approach history and what can it help. Thank you both for giving us an idea of civilizing Germany. Yeah. This is also a task of this forum, of course. One of the most challenging things at these conferences is time management. And as we are still good in time, I would now stop here with this introductory round. Thank you both very, very much for this thought-provoking talk. Before I can liberate you all for the coffee break, I have to make a few technical announcements. This conference lasts 2 days, as you all know, and the public part ends tomorrow at noon, at 12 o'clock. Today, all of you are very much invited to both the lunch and the dinner and make use of the informal space it offers to you. You will also have the chance to listen to some music of the 90s in the evening. And you have the chance in the foyer to have a touch at the 90s because colleagues and some partners have, we asked them to bring some typical for them items of their countries telling stories about the 90s. And you see a small exhibition outside there on a table. It's, you can touch everything, I think, nothing is. And there's also a very old-fashioned book in analog for handwriting. It's a guest book for you to give your feedbacks, to share your impressions. Please make use of it during these 2 days. As you all have mentioned, language of this conference is only in English, but the reading with Nino Hartishvili tonight will be in German and English with simultaneous translations. So for all of you who have no command of German, please make sure that you have an earphones and headphones in the beginning of the event. Yeah? The event will start at 8, and make sure that you get these headphones before. All of you are asked to enter your name in the list of participants if you have not already done so. And all our guests from abroad, all personally invited guests from abroad, please contact our conference team at the beginning of the dinner break tonight regarding all kind of bureaucratic requirements, contract signatures, and so on. This is important for all, not just for the speakers. So I hope this is it for the moment. Thank you very much and enjoy the coffee break. And after the coffee break, last remark, after the coffee break, we hand over to my colleague Milan Bogdanovic from Belgrade office, who has done a great deal in preparing this conference as well. And we will start with this fishbowl method, which I just briefly mentioned for all those of you who haven't seen it yet. We have the speakers here that are prepared, and we have always 2 empty chairs. And every participant, and this is really a very strong invitation, every participant who wants to join the discussion, please come into the circle. You will get the floor for your question, your comment, and you stay as long as you feel necessary to get your topic kind of discussed. And then you leave and free the chair for somebody else. So this is for interaction and make use of it as much as you can. So thank you and have a nice coffee break.